Who thinks we're out of power? Oh, smart crowd. You know, we have this efficiency issue that everybody keeps talking about, and everybody keeps applying the same method to what we've had going on for 50 years, and you're seeing everybody running out, and we're talking about putting out massive amounts. The numbers are in the millions of megawatts, right, that we're trying to get through interconnection agreements and things that are going on. And so just clearly, we have to start thinking about as an industry all the demand side, and the demand side will actually start solving the grid efficiency problems. And so we've developed a product, and it's not just us. I think the whole microgrid space really needs to think about how do we make demand side solve the grid. Chris had a great lead in, and I agree 100% with what he said. And so I want to start on a few of these on this journey of what I'm talking about. And essentially, when you think about apparent power versus active power, right? This is a problem, and I don't want to go too deep because there's probably some electrical engineers here and some people who won't even know what this is. But the reality is this inefficiency of the grid. So when the grid's giving power to you, it's not at a high power factor. If you have high motors, if you have the new AI chips, which are called throttling and doing these crazy things that are going on, you're getting these kVARs and you're really not getting good use of power. So in the US though, you know who pays for that? You are. So if you have a 99% power factor at the grid, you're doing much better than if you have a 70% power factor at the grid, because that means you're paying for 30% more than you're actually getting and using. And so what are these inefficiencies? What are they on the grid today? I mean, this is just 10% just on power factor that's happening on our grid that people are paying for. And when you think about the billions of kilowatt hours associated with this, it's really just huge amounts of power that gets wasted annually every year just from power factor. So we have this gap that is just growing in the United States associated with power factor because we have some issues that are happening on the grid from renewables. And the renewables situation that we have is inertia. So if you don't know what inertia is on the grid, anything that spins has this nice power. If you're going up a hill and you have enough power, you can actually coast over the hill. If you're going up the hill and you don't have enough power, you're actually going to stop and probably roll backwards. That's what happens when you lose inertia. Texas has lost 15% of its inertia in the last 5 years on its grid. This is why they're very subject to outages from short circuit faults, lightning arrestor issues, things that happen on the grid because we don't have spinning reserves anymore. We have renewables and batteries, which is a chemical reaction. So part of what we've done with our product and where I think the microgrid space can help is replacing what used to be spinning reserves with available inertia on the demand side. And so we got to fix this gap of this big power supply issue that keeps going on. The more renewables we add, the worse this is going to get. So as we keep growing our renewables, and you know, we're going to see this happening in every state. You know, we have negative utility prices in parts of the market now that have too much solar. You know, so the solar guys can't even make money in a competitive market when it's zero value of their power because we can't distribute it. That's inefficiencies that are going on in the grid today. Now, we have the people who take advantage of that with batteries, right? The Tesla Super Pack, right? We buy it at negative numbers and we sell it at 30, 40 cents during peak. They make money, they're all happy, right? But the solar guy's not. He's getting ripped off in this situation. That's the inefficiencies that will not allow solar and PV, or whatever we want to call it these days, and wind to be successful on our grid. And why do we need all these things? We need all of these things because we have kicked the can for 20 years on our power infrastructure. You know, the average age of coal, nuclear is in the 40-year span. You have hydros in a 50-year age. We have kicked the can on these assets. So it's convenient for that industry to use, oh, well, these renewables, I'm just going to take my stuff offline. It's because they haven't reinvested. There's a coal plant in Puerto Rico, almost 100 years old, or might even be 100 years old. They're going to refurb because in 10 years they couldn't figure out how to get PV on their grid on an island close to the equator. That's the state of the world that we're in. And that's because demand side management is not coming to play. And I think we're now all past the bureaucracy of we're not going to be all renewable and all EV cars by 2030 with 100 gigawatts of power coming from hydrogen. Does everybody think that's going to happen? Because that was the chart from the Biden administration 2 years ago. We're not even close to that. I'm not even sure we're using hydrogen at scale anywhere at this point. So you have to start thinking about where is this power coming from? How are we doing it? How are we managing it? Well, demand side is really the way that we're going to start fixing these issues, and that is microgrids. And so when we think about we're going to increase power by 15, 20% in this country, we have now a president who wants to bring manufacturing back. We can all argue over the timetables it's going to take to do that, but ultimately if we're going to bring manufacturing back, it's just more power for the grid, right? And every manufacturing job typically creates 3 more jobs to support a manufacturing job. So all those people are going to need power too. So now you're at this 4-to-1 ratio, 5-to-1 ratio that starts coming into power supply needed for manufacturing. So if you have a 10 megawatt manufacturing plant, you probably need 30 or 40 megawatt to support them. 10 megawatts is not a lot of power, but all of a sudden you need 40 and you have 100 of those, you're at 400. Data centers all of a sudden don't seem so big. And by the way, the infrastructure to do that is much more difficult because we're talking multiple locations in multiple areas, probably in greenfields at this point. So now we're running a lot of infrastructure to a lot of facilities. A data center is just one big facility. It's much easier to run one big line to somebody than it is to run 100 lines to 100 people. So all these inefficiencies will start taking place, and they've been taking place, and let's add robotics into the mix. Robotics are here. It's not, hey, robotics is coming. We are working on facilities right now. Some of them are 1 million square feet with 8,000 servo motors lifting 5,000 pallets, 5,000-pound pallets. You know what that does for harmonics? They thought they had a grid problem. They were actually causing the grid problem because they didn't understand they were in the 14th level of harmonics from all this craziness going on in their own facility. And you say, hey, can we slow this down and time it? Well, we performed it at this speed, so we got to run at this speed or it doesn't pay for itself. And then I got to go tell my shareholders why did I put in a $50 million robotics system that doesn't pay for itself? And oh, by the way, when the robotics goes down, there's 0 people in the building. And we have FedEx, UPS, all the grocery carriers, all these people are putting in these systems. Soon it'll be the dog at your house watching your house too, right? If everybody's seen the dogs that are going to run around. So all of us are going to have this issue, and we all have to start thinking about how are you solving these problems. And what I know is businesses are in business to make money. And without revenue, they don't make money. And without power, you don't make money. Oh, I guess there's some people who can do beads, out in the summer or something. But for most of us, we need power to make money. And when you need power to make money, if the government isn't going to get you the infrastructure, you're going to do it yourself. And we are all witnessing that in the data center space right now. In the data center space, they're even doing it to the point where they're getting massive fines because they're bringing out temporary turbines and running them for a couple of years. That's going on. There was one just last week. So when you see turbines, the turbine supply, the GE press release was kind of interesting, and if you talk to them, 400 weeks to get that GE turbine. So I'm not even sure why they have salespeople or why they're doing press releases if it's 400 weeks to get one, right? And that's the reality of where power is, and they're buying those assets not because we're out of power, because they can't get it to their facility. And that's an efficiency problem. And the reality is, today, if you were to take and add microgrids everywhere, we have plenty of power. And so the people that are paying for this is everybody in this room, right? And I'll talk a little bit about this energy economy that is creating winners and losers, right? So today, the residential people are getting a much bigger increase than the business people. I will tell you, 4 years ago, I started with the CRU in Ireland because there were 5,200 megawatts on their grid and 4,000 megawatts of data center requests. And the citizens revolted in Ireland and they said, why are we paying for these people's infrastructure when we don't use it? There's only a few million people in this country. We don't want to pay for this. 4-year moratorium to figure this out. And at the end of the moratorium, they said, hey, all you data center people, you have to come up with your own power. The citizens of Ireland aren't going to pay for it anymore. We are going to be the same way here in the US. It's the petri dish of what's happening here. All these costs, and by the way, all of us, me included, participate in this problem because peak shaving, demand response, real-time pricing, all allows us to play a game of winners and losers. So the guy who causes the grid problems puts in equipment to get paid for the grid problem he started. So he's now getting an unfair treatment of a lower utility bill, causing an infrastructure problem himself, and all the cost gets passed on to the people who can't afford that system, which is a lot of fixed income people and low income people. Unfortunately, they're affected the most. That's the situation that happened in Ireland. That's the situation that's going to happen here as well. And we have politicians asleep at the wheel because we've been doing it this way 50 years. We auction out prices 3 years in advance. You know, PJM just had a 10x increase in their pricing on demand response. Guess how many people we signed up? A lot. And we'll continue signing people up because we're opportunistic. And the opportunistic needs to move from that program to actually showing our customers how they can actually put in a microgrid and save money behind the meter. And tell the utility, I don't need your power. Because if you start telling the utility, I don't need your power, they'll want to participate. Because they're really just big asset companies, right? So the question is, can we improve this? Are there better ways? Yes, there's a lot of ways to do this. We have a non-interconnection system that we've developed, but even if you have to get an interconnection, getting standardized interconnections and getting our industry to focus on, hey, FERC, can we get this agreement that if I do this, I can actually get an interconnection so that I can have a soft load transfer or a connection that I can maintain continuity with my customer? You know, that is really the lobbying that this group needs to start doing for the grid, because the numbers are massive. So this is the real numbers that I started compiling over the last year of what happens from infrastructure savings for microgrids. These numbers would blow most people away if you could say this in your business. I have FPL, I live in Florida, they're doing a $9 billion rate increase over the next 4 years. If we went to base load for every customer in Florida, meaning a microgrid behind the meter, we would save them $12 billion. And guess what? After 4 years, when the $9 billion goes away, they'll sign another one. That's the system we live in. That's the 50-year process that has been going on for a long time. It's the process that needs to be broken. When you look at these numbers and how big they are, and the savings that can be made from microgrids, and actually going through a process and educating utilities and politicians on why the demand side is so important in our country, and why the people who cause the problem actually could then pay for the problem. If a data center puts in this infrastructure, they're paying for their problem and they could be base load to the utility, which actually gives the utility back the inertia that they're losing with renewables, which means we can put more renewables on the grid because we have instantaneous fixed inertia with data centers. The 15% lost would be more than made up in Texas if the data centers did that, which means you can put more renewables on the grid. So that's how microgrids can improve efficiencies. You know, the benefits for operation managers are huge. You have instant backup, the peak, all these things, you can actually make them go away. The utility should be embracing, why can't every customer give me an 8,760 hour base load? And we do everything else on the demand side, because that's possible with batteries, solar, wind. We can do all of that. It's very difficult to do a 24-hour solar behind the meter, but it's pretty easy to do a couple hours of peak shaving. And you think about, you know, I've had these conversations with people, housing is very easy to do this with an example. The average home uses 2 kilowatts an hour, right? It's about 6 amps. We have a 200 amp panel that the utility supplies 200 amps of power to all the time. Why? Because the specs say, well, I have these inrushes. These inrushes are 50 amps, 100 amps. When my air conditioner comes on, I want to run my dryer when it's 90 degrees. You know, all these fun things that happen, and we use all this power. The reality is, if you put a battery there, you need a 2 kilowatt generator. You can run that for about $150 a month on propane. That's cheaper than most utility bills by just buying a battery. You think the utilities would go, hey, I'm going to put a battery at every house to handle all the inrushes with a simple inverter, and then I don't need a 20 kilowatt Generac. Sorry, Generac, I know you're here. But in the end, you need 2 kilowatts, not 20 to 30 for the 200 amp transfer switch, right? That's all just smartness of using the technology that everybody here can put to play. Inverters, IGBT inverters, whatever, simple inverters, whatever inverter you want to use, you can go buy a marine inverter for God's sake and solve these problems. There's a lot of things that you can do to solve these efficiency issues, and you know, the world has to start embracing the demand side. And you know, Edison lost, Westinghouse won. However, we proliferate everything we do in DC, right? So AC is very good at passing power long distances. It's not very good at peak demands. It's not very good at, you know, all the transients that go on in a system. It's just not very good at that. We need to do that behind the meter. And when we start doing that behind the meter, we're going to see the efficiencies. We will see utility bills come down, and we'll see a much better power flow. That's just the reality. So our system is a next generation system, I call it. We've developed what we call a synthetic grid. And for people who don't know what that means, it's basically we emulate everything the grid does behind the meter within the power of that system. So we have an AI tool, we take AI tools, we watch the loads, we put up to a couple million lines of code into a simulator. We say, look, these are the power nodes that these people need. These are their peaks. These are their valleys. This is what happens for real at this customer. You run 100,000 simulations of what's going on. You know, we just signed an agreement with Neighbors. Neighbors has 4 megawatts on a drilling rig. They run it for 45 days. Their average load is 1,255 kW. They run all 4 megawatts 45 days because of transients. Our system eliminates 2 engines off the platform. We run 1 engine all the time, and we use the other for some peaks. 1 cycle on the battery for 45 days. 70% of the diesel goes away. That's energy efficiency. And that's the way we need to think about all of our energy. We add that with some monitoring. Everybody's into monitoring these days. We're using that same AI information. You know, we all have to start building large language models associated with AI for customers. So when you do that and you start building, and that's a little bit what these guys were talking about earlier, you start building this AI language model, and we will get the information we need to know when to do maintenance, not just guessing at maintenance. We have predictive health in our system that we can do. So we can start telling you, hey, this looks like it's a little out of line. Electronic signature is where we're going. I think in the future, our industry will do electronic signatures. So just like your cell phone, when you put an app on, it recognizes whose phone you have, what firmware you have, and it goes out and does things, right? I think we will end up that way on the grid behind the meter eventually. We will know when you plug that in, whose engine you have, whose panel you have, what refrigerator you're running inside, and we'll automatically start understanding and communicating with those systems and knowing how to handle those inrushes through microgrids. That's where our industry is going, and I think we'll get there faster than most people think because of AI. So, welcome to the energy future. We'll be happy to talk to anybody in booth 503 if you want to come see us.